Rain tanks and suburban tyranny, a battle for control. The Arizona sun beat down on my new home in Desert Bloom Estates, a tidy suburban neighborhood where manicured lawns and xeriscaped gardens whispered promises of tranquility. At 52, I'd moved here after a bruising divorce, seeking a fresh start as a landscape architect passionate about sustainable design. My name is Daniel Carter, and I'd spent decades crafting urban oases that conserved resources while looking beautiful. Arizona's relentless drought made it the perfect place to practice what I preached. But I never imagined a simple rainwater tank would turn my quiet corner of paradise into a battleground. It all began 6 months ago when I decided to install a 500-gallon rainwater harvesting system in my side yard. In a state where rain was scarce but fierce, capturing it for garden irrigation seemed like common sense. I'd done my homework, checked local laws, secured permits from the city and county, and hired a professional contractor specializing in eco-friendly water systems. The tank was sleek, modern, and partially screened by desert plants to blend with the neighborhood's aesthetic. Arizona's progressive water harvesting laws backed me up, and the HOA bylaws I'd received didn't mention any prohibitions. I thought I was in the clear. The installation crew arrived on a crisp Thursday morning, their drills humming as they set up the tank. Everything was going smoothly until a shadow fell over the project. "That's quite the contraption you're building," came a voice laced with disapproval. I turned to see a woman in her late 40s, arms crossed, standing at the edge of my property. Her blonde hair was impeccably styled, and her designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. This was my first encounter with Margaret Ellison, though I'd soon learned the neighbors called her Maggie the Monarch behind her back, a nickname she'd earned through years of HOA tyranny. I introduced myself, extending a hand and explaining my goal of conserving water. "I'm on the HOA board," she declared, ignoring my gesture. "I don't recall approving this installation." Her tone suggested she ruled Desert Bloom Estates like a private fiefdom. Smiling politely, I pulled out my permits and cited Arizona Revised Statute 45 to 454, which protects homeowners' rights to harvest rainwater. "The HOA bylaws don't restrict this," I added, handing her the documents. Margaret's lips pursed as she skimmed them, her eyes narrowing. She couldn't argue with the law, but her expression screamed that this wasn't over. "We'll discuss this eyesore at the next HOA meeting," she said, returning the papers as if they were toxic. "Not everything legal fits our community's aesthetic." As she marched off, a voice called from the house next door. "Don't mind Hurricane Maggie. She storms through here regularly." That was my introduction to Frank Thompson, a 68-year-old retired civil engineer who'd become my greatest ally. Frank ambled over, admired the tank's design, and offered technical tips to the crew. Over coffee, he filled me in on Margaret's reign. She's been on the board 5 years and treats this place like her kingdom. Last year, she forced the Parkers to rip out their vegetable garden because it clashed with the desert vibe. The Lopez's got fined for a front door that was the wrong shade of beige. By late afternoon, the tank was installed, its clean lines blending with the agave and cacti I'd planted. Margaret returned, this time with another board member, repeating her threat about the HOA meeting. I thanked her for her concern, reiterating the state law. As she walked away, I heard her mutter, "We'll see about that." Frank, watering his succulents, caught my eye and shook his head. I didn't know it then, but Margaret wasn't just annoyed. She saw my tank as a challenge to her authority, and she was ready to escalate. The next morning, a certified letter arrived, announcing an emergency HOA meeting Monday evening to address my unauthorized water structure. I called Frank, who'd given me his number just in case. He revealed Margaret's deeper motives. "She's gunning for city council next year," he said. "This neighborhood is her campaign backdrop, and your tank doesn't fit her vision of suburban perfection." I spent the weekend preparing, gathering permits, printing statutes, and collecting photos of other eco-friendly setups in the neighborhood that hadn't been targeted. Monday's meeting was packed. Margaret had rallied her loyalists, but curious residents filled the community center, too. Richard Bennett, the 73-year-old HOA president and retired attorney, opened with a weary sigh. We're here to discuss a concern raised by board member Margaret Ellison about a water collection system at the Carter residence. Margaret launched into a PowerPoint presentation, each slide showcasing my tank from unflattering angles, some clearly taken from my backyard without permission. This industrial monstrosity violates our desert aesthetic, she declared. It's a health hazard, breeding mosquitoes and endangering our families. When my turn came, I walked through my permits, explained the tank's environmental benefits, and noted its mosquito screens and state certification. Arizona encourages these systems to fight drought, I said, passing copies to the board. A woman named Susan Martinez, known for her stunning native plant garden, spoke up. We live in a desert. Water conservation is something to celebrate, not punish. Richard suggested a compromise, extra landscaping to shield the tank, but Margaret pounced. I've drafted an amendment to our bylaws, she said, distributing a document she'd clearly prepared well in advance. It required all water systems to be underground and invisible, a near impossible standard. Worse, she'd secured enough proxy votes to pass it. My heart sank as the amendment passed, giving me 14 days to comply or face $100 daily fines. Susan caught me in the parking lot. This isn't about your tank, she whispered. Margaret's building her campaign on conformity. She did this to the Garcias over a basketball hoop. They moved out. I realized this wasn't just about water. It was about power. And I wasn't going to let Margaret bully me out of my home. The morning after the HOA ambush, I woke to a mix of shock and simmering anger. I'd come to Desert Bloom Estates for a fresh start, not to tangle with a suburban dictator. At 52, I'd faced my share of challenges, divorce, career shifts, the loss of my parents, but nothing prepared me for Margaret Ellison's calculated assault. My first instinct was to comply, rip out the rainwater tank, and avoid further conflict. I'd only been here 3 months, after all. But as I sipped my coffee, staring at the tank glinting in the Arizona sun, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about water. It was about standing up to a bully who thought she could control everyone around her. I called the contractor who'd installed the system, asking what it would take to make the tank underground and invisible per Margaret's new HOA amendment. His response was grim. You're looking at $15,000 minimum for a complete rebuild, he said. Even then, you'd need above-ground access for maintenance. I hung up, realizing the amendment was a trap designed to force me to remove the tank entirely. Margaret hadn't just outmaneuvered me, she'd rigged the game. My years as a landscape architect had taught me to navigate regulations and solve problems creatively, so I turned to research. Arizona's HOA laws required proper notice and procedural fairness for bylaw amendments. Margaret's rushed proxy votes, gathered before the meeting was even announced, smelled fishy. I started documenting everything, emails, interactions, daily photos of my property, building a timeline to protect myself. Frank Thompson, my retired engineer neighbor, invited me over for coffee, and what I thought would be a casual venting session became a turning point. His living room, strategically angled away from Margaret's prying eyes, was a war room for what he called the Desert Bloom Resistance. Susan Martinez joined us, bringing a binder stuffed with notes on Margaret's past campaigns against neighbors. She's systematic, Susan said, spreading photos across Frank's coffee table. Margaret targets homes that don't fit her vision of a perfect campaign backdrop. Vegetable gardens, colorful doors, kids' swing sets, anything that disrupts her 1950s suburban fantasy. The photos revealed a chilling pattern. Over 3 years, Margaret had pressured families to conform or leave. The Clarks had removed their solar panels after relentless fines. The Nguyen's had painted over their vibrant mural to avoid legal threats. Susan's voice was steady but fierce. She started small, but your tank is her boldest target yet because it's protected by state law. She's testing how far she can push. Frank took me on a walk past Margaret's backyard, where sprinklers ran in the mid-afternoon heat, a clear violation of county drought restrictions. The hypocrisy was infuriating. I borrowed Frank's telephoto lens and documented her water waste for 3 days straight. Public records revealed more. Margaret had blocked a neighborhood-wide xeriscaping initiative 2 years earlier, claiming it would ruin Desert Bloom's lush appearance, while water bills for common areas spiked 30% under her watch. She wasn't just anti-rain tank. She was against anything that didn't fit her curated image, all while Arizona grappled with its worst drought in decades. Our resistance grew when Ellen Harper, a 38-year-old real estate attorney who'd moved in shortly before me, overheard me talking to Susan at a coffee shop. "I've been digging into the HOA documents," Ellen said, spreading papers across our table. Margaret broke at least 3 rules pushing that amendment. No proper notice, proxy votes collected prematurely, and no supermajority for property rights changes. Ellen's legal expertise gave me hope. She drafted a formal challenge to the amendment, citing procedural violations, and I submitted it to Richard Bennett, the HOA president. Richard called me the next day, his voice hushed. "Daniel, your points are valid. I didn't like how this was rammed through, but Margaret has sway with some board members. Give me time to review. And be careful, she doesn't handle pushback well." His warning came true that afternoon. I returned home to find Margaret and another board member in my driveway, measuring and photographing my tank. "You're trespassing," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. Margaret didn't flinch. "We're documenting violations. Your 14-day compliance period is ticking." I stood firm, phone in hand. "Leave my property now, or I'm calling the police." Margaret's eyes flicked to my phone, calculating whether I was recording. "Some people don't belong in Desert Bloom," she hissed before stalking off. As she left, I spotted movement in my side yard, a young man in his 20s snapping photos. "Who's that?" I demanded. Margaret didn't answer, but Frank later confirmed it was Nathan Ellison, her son, recruited to aid her harassment campaign. Then Susan texted me. "She's done this before. Check your water meter." Flashlight in hand, I examined my meter that night. Scratches marred the faceplate, and the seal showed tamper marks. Someone had messed with it. I took photos from every angle, my pulse racing. The next morning, I bought a home security system, motion-activated cameras focused on the meter and tank. At 2:15 a.m., my phone buzzed with an alert. Night vision footage showed Nathan kneeling by the meter, tools in hand, adjusting something. I reported it to the water utility, and an inspector confirmed the meter had been rigged to show 30% higher usage. "This isn't amateur work," he said, photographing the evidence. "I've seen this in water theft schemes, but not in a neighborhood like this." The inspector's words hit hard. This wasn't just harassment. It was fraud designed to paint me as a water waster during a drought. If Margaret's plan had worked, I could have faced crippling fines or public shaming. Armed with the footage and the utilities report, I confronted Margaret in her front yard, where she was watering roses during restricted hours. "I have video of Nathan tampering with my meter," I said, holding up my phone. The utility filed a report. "Back off, or I'm going to the police." Her face paled for a split second before she recovered. "That video's fake," she snapped. "Nathan would never." "Be careful with false accusations, Mr. Carter. Defamation's serious." I walked away, the battle lines clearer than ever. Neighbors started picking sides. Susan brought me a casserole, Frank helped reinforce the tank's base, and Ellen offered legal advice. Others kept their distance, wary of Margaret's influence. I noticed her car circling my street at odd hours, and Nathan's motorcycle slowed as it passed my driveway. The pressure was constant, like living under a microscope. Margaret spread rumors that I was stealing municipal water and spying on neighbors with my cameras. Some older residents gave me wary looks, despite my efforts to clarify that my cameras only covered my property. My background in sustainable design became my edge. I installed a monitoring system to track water flow from the tank to my irrigation, logging every gallon to prove I wasn't using city water. I invited a master gardener and a retired environmental professor to inspect it. "This is the future for desert communities," the professor said loudly, as neighbors tended their yards nearby. "Systems like this could cut municipal water use by 20%. Their validation countered Margaret's lies, but the war was far from over. The Arizona sky unleashed a rare deluge one evening, filling my 500-gallon rainwater tank to the brim. As a landscape architect, I'd always found joy in harnessing nature's gifts, and watching the tank capture every drop felt like a small victory against the desert's relentless drought. I connected it to a drip irrigation system, watering my agave and prickly pear during the dry week that followed. It was a quiet moment of triumph, until Margaret Ellison struck again. I was working from home one afternoon, reviewing blueprints when I noticed Margaret across the street, scribbling notes as my irrigation ran. Her smug expression told me she was plotting her next move. I should have anticipated it, but the scale of her retaliation blindsided me. The next day, at 2:23 p.m., four police cars screeched to a halt outside my house, lights flashing. A utility truck parked behind them. Margaret watched from her driveway, arms crossed, her satisfaction palpable. Daniel Carter, the lead officer, a stern woman with a hand near her belt, asked. I nodded, my stomach churning. We receive a report you're operating an illegal water grid and stealing municipal water during drought restrictions. We need to inspect your property. I took a deep breath, fighting to stay calm. Officer, my rainwater harvesting system is fully permitted, and I'm using collected rainwater, not city water. I'll show you everything. For the next half hour, I walked the officers through the setup, permits, filtration system, irrigation lines. I demonstrated how the tank worked, pulling on my water flow logs for good measure. The utility representative, a wiry man with a clipboard, examined the system with genuine interest. This is impressive, he said, noting a rebate program for similar setups. The officer's suspicion melted away, replaced by irritation, not at me, but at the false report. Sorry for the disruption, Mr. Carter, the lead officer said, handing back my documents. Your system's legal and well-designed. I couldn't resist. Who reported me? She hesitated, then replied. The call came from Margaret Ellison. She claimed water theft and an illegal grid. We had to respond. As the police cars pulled away, I caught Margaret's expression shift from smug to something new, fear. One officer stopped at her house, speaking briefly. I couldn't hear the exchange, but that night, Richard Bennett, the HOA president, emailed me. Emergency board meeting tomorrow. Margaret's actions have gone too far. The meeting was electric with tension. The community center was packed, the air thick with anger. Richard, his face etched with exhaustion, opened gravely. We're here to address actions that have brought unwanted attention to our community and may constitute harassment. I was stunned to see Officer Larson from the police visit in the back row, taking notes. She'd returned to my house that morning, revealing Margaret's address had made multiple false calls over the past year. Filing false reports is serious, she'd said. MS. Ellison could face charges if this continues. Richard outlined Margaret's campaign against my tank, the questionable HOA amendment, and the false police report. The board has received numerous complaints, he said, holding up printed emails. Many of you say this isn't the first time. Neighbors stood, one by one, sharing their stories. The Patels spoke of harassment over holiday lights. The Delgados described weekly complaints about their kids' swing set. The Harrisons admitted they'd moved after Margaret's relentless fines over their xeriscaped yard. A pattern emerged. Margaret wasn't enforcing rules. She was targeting anyone who didn't fit her vision of a perfect campaign backdrop for her city council run. Susan Martinez presented photos of Margaret snapping pictures of unapproved homes, including campaign-style shots of herself in front of conforming properties. She's building her campaign on forced conformity, Susan said. Richard, visibly troubled, called for a vote to rescind the water tank amendment due to procedural violations. It passed overwhelmingly, with only Margaret and two allies dissenting. He then proposed a committee to overhaul the HOA bylaws transparently. Our standards must be fair, he said. I was invited to join, alongside Susan, Ellen Harper, and others. Margaret's response was desperate. I've only protected property values, she shouted. This neighborhood was declining before I joined the board. Look at what I've achieved. When that failed, she turned menacing. If you allow that industrial tank, what's next? Solar panels everywhere? Vegetable gardens? Toys cluttering yards? Property values will collapse. Her apocalyptic vision, sustainability, gardens, children playing, drew laughter from the crowd. Margaret's priorities were laughably out of touch. The meeting ended with the amendment repealed and a new era dawning for Desert Bloom. But Margaret wasn't done. The next morning, I found my tank vandalized. The irrigation hose was slashed, the main valve damaged. My security camera was smeared with mud, though a partial clip showed a shadowy figure in my yard. The message was clear: Margaret was escalating. I spent the day repairing the tank with Frank's help, installing new cameras with better angles and backup power. She's losing control, Frank said grimly. That makes her dangerous. That afternoon, an anonymous note in my mailbox chilled me. Water thieves don't belong here. I called Officer Larson, who collected the note and promised more patrols. Threats and vandalism are criminal, not HOA disputes, she said. As she left, I spotted something odd in my garden bed, a decorative irrigation sensor, aimed at my front door, its green light blinking. It wasn't mine. Someone had been on my property again, and they wanted me to know I was being watched. That night, alone in my kitchen, I stared at the sensor, now in evidence bag. The constant vigilance was wearing me down. I jumped at every noise, checked my security app obsessively, and felt a knot in my gut whenever Margaret's car passed. Was a rainwater tank worth this? I considered selling the house, escaping to a place without HOAs, leaving this nightmare behind. But my allies rallied. Frank brought coffee, Susan delivered muffins, and Ellen arrived with legal strategies and fierce resolve. This isn't just about you, Ellen said over breakfast. Margaret's terrorizing the whole community. If we don't stop her, who's next? Their support shifted my mindset from victim to strategist. My career had taught me to solve complex problems. Now it was time to apply that to Margaret. Our first move was the mysterious sensor. Frank's grandson, Tyler, a computer engineering student, examined it in his garage. This isn't an irrigation sensor, he said, gloved hands prying it open. It's a wireless camera with a live feed. Sophisticated stuff. Tyler traced the signal to an apartment complex nearby. Property records showed Unit 14 was rented to Nathan Ellison, Margaret's son. With this, plus the vandalism and meter tampering, Ellen helped me build a case for the police. Detective Warren, a no-nonsense property crimes investigator, took it seriously. Harassment, trespassing, vandalism, illegal surveillance. These are criminal matters, he said. This crossed the HOA line long ago. He secured a search warrant for Nathan's apartment. As the legal wheels turned, I fortified my home. Extra lighting, stronger locks, a security protocol Ellen jokingly called Fort Knox. I also started therapy to manage the stress of living under siege. The search of Nathan's apartment was a game changer. Detective Warren called me that evening, his voice tinged with disbelief. Mr. Carter, we found concerning items at Nathan Ellison's residence. Come to the station tomorrow. I barely slept, my mind racing with what they'd uncovered. The police station's conference room was sterile, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on the evidence spread across the table. Detective Warren, a grizzled investigator with a no-nonsense demeanor, laid it out methodically. Dozens of photos of my house taken at all hours, handwritten notes tracking my daily routine, damaged irrigation parts matching my vandalized rainwater tank, and most unsettling, copies of my water utility bills that could only have been obtained illegally. I sat there, a 52-year-old landscape architect who'd moved to Desert Bloom Estates for peace, now staring at proof that I'd been stalked in my own home. Nathan Ellison's been cooperative, Detective Warren said, his voice steady but laced with disbelief. He's willing to testify against his mother for leniency. Nathan's recorded statement, played on a laptop, revealed the depth of Margaret Ellison's obsession. Mom's running for city council next year, he said, his voice trembling. She's fixated on making Desert Bloom the perfect backdrop for her campaign. The rain tank ruined her vision of a pristine suburban oasis. She said it looked industrial, not traditional. Nathan admitted to installing the fake irrigation sensor, a wireless camera, tampering with my water meter, and damaging my tank, all under Margaret's direction. But the real bombshell was this. Margaret kept files on 5 other former residents, all targeted for aesthetic violations that clashed with her campaign image. Those families had either conformed or left. The evidence was staggering. Spreadsheets tracked when I left for work, when my lights went out, even what groceries I carried inside. Detective Warren leaned back. This isn't just harassment. It's a calculated campaign. We found similar files on those other residents. The district attorney filed charges against Margaret and Nathan: harassment, vandalism, criminal trespass, and illegal surveillance. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and Margaret was removed from the board pending the investigation. I stood before the homeowners, my voice steady despite the surreal weight of it all. This goes beyond my tank, I said. It's about control, not community. Margaret, released on bail, doubled down. She rallied her dwindling supporters, spreading wild claims. I was a radical environmentalist sabotaging property values. The police evidence was fabricated. It was all a conspiracy to derail her political dreams. Few bought it, but the neighborhood remained on edge. One evening, as I walked my dog, a silver sedan pulled up. The driver, an older man with tired eyes, introduced himself as Robert Ellison, Margaret's ex-husband. I saw the story in the paper, he said, sitting with me on a park bench far from Margaret's house. I'm not surprised. Robert revealed that Margaret had targeted him during their marriage. I wanted solar panels on our roof, he said. She said they'd ruin her traditional values image. When I installed them, she made my life hell until I left. He had emails showing her plans to shape Desert Bloom into a campaign set piece, even from their previous neighborhood. She's always about the image, never the people, he said, offering to testify. His story was a haunting echo of my own, and it steeled my resolve to see this through. While the criminal case crawled through the legal system, Desert Bloom began to transform. Richard Bennett, the HOA president, led our transparency committee, myself, Susan Martinez, Ellen Harper, and others in rewriting the bylaws. We balanced aesthetics with sustainability and personal freedom, ensuring no one could weaponize rules like Margaret had. My rain tank, once a lightning rod, inspired a neighborhood-wide water conservation program. The utility company featured us in a campaign about drought mitigation, and a block party celebrating these changes drew nearly every household. Neighbors who'd barely spoken now swapped tips on desert gardening, their yards blooming with native plants. My journey through this conflict changed me. I'd arrived conflict-averse, hoping to keep my head down. But Margaret's harassment forced me to step up. My skills as a landscape architect, navigating regulations, balancing form and function, translated into community advocacy. I spoke at city council meetings about progressive HOA models and water conservation, an irony not lost on me. Margaret's attacks had pushed me into the public sphere she craved. Susan and Frank became close friends, and Ellen and I started spending time together outside legal strategy sessions. The battle forged bonds I'd never expected. But Margaret wasn't finished. 2 days after her arrest, I was granted a restraining order against her and Nathan, barring them from coming within 100 yards of me or my property. Yet her desperation grew. One morning, I found my mailbox stuffed with flyers claiming I was destroying Desert Bloom's charm. The next day, a neighbor reported seeing Nathan's motorcycle near my street, despite the order. I tightened my security, more cameras, brighter lights, and kept my therapist on speed dial. The stress was relentless, but I refused to back down. The legal consequences hit 4 months after the arrests. Facing overwhelming evidence, Margaret took a plea deal: 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service. Ironically, on a watershed protection project, and substantial restitution to me and other victims. Nathan, fully cooperative, entered a diversion program, his record clear if he completed community service and education. The local news devoured the story, with headlines like "Picture Perfect Politics Turns Ugly," ending Margaret's city council hopes. Her obsession with a flawless neighborhood had become a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. 6 months after our first clash, I stood by my rain tank as a county official presented Desert Bloom with an award for water conservation. The tank, now framed by thriving cacti and an educational plaque, was a point of pride. Margaret had sold her house and moved out of state, fleeing the scandal. The new family in her home approached me, eager to install their own tank. I watched our community, once a battleground, become a model of collaboration, marveling at the transformation. But the fight wasn't without scars. The months of stress, thousands in legal fees, and sleepless nights had taken a toll. I questioned my resolve more times than I could count. Yet, standing by the tank, watching raindrops ripple inside, I realized it was never just about water. It was about resisting fear and intimidation. One person saying enough had sparked a revolution in Desert Bloom. The fake irrigation sensors, cameras meant to spy, now lined our community garden, pointed at a wall, a reminder that we watched out for each other, not over each other. The Desert Bloom Estate's community garden was alive with color as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over rows of native plants and shared vegetable plots. It was a far cry from the tense, divided neighborhood I'd moved into a year ago. At 52, I'd never imagined my simple rainwater tank would ignite a suburban revolution. But as I stood among neighbors at the garden's grand opening, I felt a quiet pride. The tank that Margaret Ellison had demonized now powered a drip irrigation system for the garden, a symbol of what we'd achieved together. But getting here had tested every ounce of my resolve. The weeks following Margaret's plea deal were a whirlwind. Her conviction, 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and restitution to me and other victims, marked the end of her reign over Desert Bloom. The local news ran exposés on her campaign of harassment, with headlines like HOA Tyrants Fall, a neighborhood fights back. Her city council dreams collapsed under the weight of the scandal, and she sold her house, moving to another state to escape the humiliation. The new family in her former home, the Thompsons, wasted no time integrating. Their first week, they knocked on my door, asking for advice on installing a rain tank. "We heard you're the expert, Mrs. Thompson said with a grin. I spent an afternoon sketching designs, feeling a spark of hope that hadn't been there before. But the scars of the battle lingered. The stress of living under Margaret's surveillance, her son Nathan's vandalism, the fake irrigation sensors, the tampered water meter, had left me jumpy. I still checked my security app compulsively, half expecting to see Nathan's motorcycle in the shadows, despite his diversion program and the restraining order. Therapy helped, but the psychological toll was real. I'd spent thousands on legal fees, repairs, and security upgrades, and there were nights I'd stared at the ceiling, wondering if standing my ground had been worth it. Yet, every time I doubted, my neighbors, Frank Thompson, Susan Martinez, Ellen Harper, reminded me why I'd fought. The Transparency Committee, which I'd joined with Susan, Ellen, and others, became the heart of Desert Bloom's transformation. Under Richard Bennett's leadership, we rewrote the HOA bylaws from the ground up. No more arbitrary rules or power-hungry board members. We crafted guidelines that balanced aesthetics with sustainability, allowing rain tanks, solar panels, and native plant gardens while ensuring the neighborhood's charm. The process wasn't without debate. Some residents clung to the old desert aesthetic Margaret had championed, but open forums and transparent voting won them over. When we presented the new bylaws at a community meeting, the room erupted in applause. Richard, his tired eyes bright for the first time in months, shook my hand. "You didn't just save your tank, Daniel. You saved this neighborhood." Our water conservation initiative, inspired by my tank, gained momentum. The utility company partnered with us, offering rebates for rain harvesting systems, and featured Desert Bloom in a statewide campaign about drought mitigation. A county environmental official visited, presenting us with an award for community innovation. Standing beside my tank, now surrounded by thriving cacti and an educational display, I accepted the plaque on behalf of the neighborhood. Cameras flashed, and neighbors cheered, but my mind drifted to the dark days, the police cars, the vandalized tank, the chilling note in my mailbox. The victory was sweet, but it had come at a cost. The community garden's opening was the culmination of our efforts. Families gathered, kids darting between raised beds, while adults swapped tips on growing desert-adapted crops. Frank, ever the engineer, had designed a solar-powered pump for the garden's irrigation linked to my tank. Susan's native plants drew butterflies, and Ellen, who became more than a legal ally, organized a composting workshop. The fake irrigation sensors, Margaret's spying cameras, were repurposed as garden decorations, their lenses pointed at a mural of saguaro cacti, a cheeky reminder of our vigilance. "We watch out for each other now," Susan said, clinking her lemonade glass against mine. My role in the community evolved too. I'd arrived as a newcomer, hoping to keep a low profile after my divorce. But Margaret's attacks had thrust me into leadership. My expertise as a landscape architect, designing sustainable systems, navigating regulations, found new purpose. I spoke at city council meetings, advocating for HOA reforms and water conservation policies. The irony wasn't lost on me. Margaret's campaign to silence me had given me a platform she'd craved. I even started a consulting business, helping other neighborhoods design eco-friendly landscapes, with Desert Bloom as my flagship case study. On a personal level, the battle forged bonds that changed my life. Frank and his wife invited me for Sunday barbecues, their stories of raising kids in the 80s grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. Susan's warmth and homemade tamales became a weekly ritual. And Ellen, sharp, compassionate Ellen, became someone I couldn't imagine my days without. We'd started dating quietly, our shared fight against Margaret deepening into something real. One evening, as we sat on my patio watching the stars, she laughed. Who knew a rain tank would lead to this? I squeezed her hand, grateful for the unexpected gifts amid the chaos. The final piece of justice came unexpectedly. A year after the conflict began, I received a check from Margaret's restitution, covering my legal and repair costs. It wasn't just about the money, it was closure. The courts had ordered her to pay all 5 victims identified in Nathan's files, a small reckoning for the family she'd driven out. Nathan, meanwhile, completed his diversion program, enrolling in a community college to study environmental science. A twist I hadn't seen coming. I ran into him at a hardware store, and he apologized, his eyes downcast. I got caught up in Mom's plans, he said. I'm trying to make it right. I nodded, unsure if I could forgive, but willing to let him try. Desert Bloom today is unrecognizable from the battleground it was. Neighbors collaborate on projects, from solar panel co-ops to a kids' gardening club. The HOA, once a tool of control, now hosts workshops on sustainable living. My tank, once an eyesore, is a point of pride with a plaque reading, dedicated to the resilience of Desert Bloom estates. The community's transformation is a testament to what happens when people stand together against tyranny, but it's also a reminder of how easily one person's ambition can fracture a neighborhood. Looking back, I see the fight wasn't just about a rain tank. It was about resisting fear, about refusing to let a bully dictate my life or my neighbors. Margaret wielded rules like weapons, but we turned her own tactics against her. Evidence, transparency, community. The cost was high. Months of anxiety, financial strain, the constant weight of being watched. But the reward was a neighborhood reborn, friendships forged, and a purpose I hadn't known I needed. Sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing. It takes one person to say enough, but it takes a community to make it last. As I write this, rain patters into my tank, a soft rhythm against the desert silence. I think of a note in my mailbox, the police lights, Margaret's cold stare. Then I think of Frank's steady hand, Susan's courage, Ellen's smile. The tank isn't just collecting water, it's holding the story of how we fought and won. And those fake sensors in the garden? They're a promise. In Desert Bloom, we've got each other's backs. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you faced a bully like Margaret, whether in an HOA, workplace, or elsewhere? How did you stand up to injustice, and what did it cost you? Share your stories in the comments below. And let's talk about the toll of bullying and the power of fighting back. What's your take? When is it worth the fight, and when do you walk away? Your voice matters, so weigh in and let's keep this conversation going.